They say a mother's love is blind. We wrap our children in it, hoping it will protect them from the cold of the world. But what happens when the cold isn't outside? What happens when the monster you're trying to lock out is the very son you invited to sit at your own dinner table? I am Maria Washington. Over the last 40 years, I built soul and foundation from a single flour-dusted bakery in South Atlanta into a real estate and community empire. I built it with calloused hands, a spine of steel, and the grace of the Lord. But as I sat in my mahogany office on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon, none of that money, none of that power could stop the violent tremor in my right hand. The gold pen felt like a lead weight. I was supposed to be signing a neighborhood revitalization grant, but the letters of my own name blurred on the crisp white paper. A wave of nausea, cold and sharp, washed over me. I gripped the edge of the heavy oak desk, fighting the spinning room. "You're pushing yourself too hard again, Mama." The voice was smooth, polished like expensive leather. I looked up through the fog in my eyes to see my son, Trey. He was 35, dressed in a custom charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first restaurant made in a year. He stood in the doorway, the picture of a devoted, successful son, but there was something in his posture, a stillness that didn't quite reach his eyes. He walked toward my desk, carrying a steaming porcelain cup on a silver saucer. The earthy, sharply bitter scent of the herbal tea cut through the air-conditioned chill of the office. "Drink this," Trey murmured, his tone dripping with practiced concern as he placed the cup near my trembling hand. "Jasmine got this special detox blend imported just for you. It's supposed to help with your circulation. You've been having these spells all month." I looked at the dark, murky liquid. For the past 6 months, I had been deteriorating. Doctors blamed it on stress, on my age. 62 wasn't young, they said. But I didn't just feel old. I felt like a machine shutting down, gear by gear. "Thank you, Trey," I rasped, forcing a grateful smile. I took a small sip. The bitterness coated my throat, leaving a metallic aftertaste that made my stomach churn. "And Mama," Trey added, casually adjusting his pure silk tie, "don't worry about the downtown zoning meeting tomorrow. Jasmine and I can handle it. You just rest. After what Nia put this family through, you deserve a break." At the mention of her name, my chest tightened. Nia, my daughter-in-law. 8 months ago, Trey had come to my house in tears, claiming Nia had drained $250,000 from their joint accounts and fled to Chicago with a lover. He painted a picture of a gold digger who had finally shown her true colors. I had believed him. I had comforted my weeping son, mourning the sweet, soft-spoken girl I thought I knew. "I'll rest after I finish the community walkthrough," I said, my voice finding a fraction of its usual iron. I stood up, leaning heavily on my cane. "Elias is waiting downstairs." Trey's smile didn't falter, but his jaw tightened. "Suit yourself, Mama. Just finish your tea." An hour later, my longtime driver and oldest friend, Elias, pulled the black town car up to a crumbling diner on the absolute edge of Fulton County. I insisted on visiting the community centers we funded in person. You can't see the soul of a neighborhood through a spreadsheet. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and cheap fry grease. It was a place for forgotten people, far from the gleaming glass towers of downtown Atlanta. I sat in a faded vinyl booth, waiting for the local community organizer. My vision was still swimming, the metallic taste of Trey's tea clinging stubbornly to the back of my tongue. Then I heard it. Crash. "Hey, watch it, you clumsy idiot!" a rough voice barked from the grill. I blinked away my dizziness and looked toward the service counter. A waitress was on her hands and knees, frantically scooping up broken fries and shattered plates. She was wearing a stained, ill-fitting pink uniform that offered zero dignity. But it was her silhouette that made the breath lodge in my throat. She was heavily, undeniably pregnant. At least 8 months along. She moved with a desperate, painful sluggishness, her hands shaking worse than mine. I'm so sorry," she whimpered, her voice cracking. That voice. I gripped the edge of the sticky table, pulling my aching body up. I walked toward the counter, the sounds of the diner fading into a dull roar in my ears. As I got closer, the waitress looked up, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with deep, bruised bags of exhaustion. My heart simply stopped beating. "Nia?" I whispered. The name felt like a ghost leaving my lips. The young woman who my son swore was living a life of luxury in Chicago with a stolen fortune was kneeling in a puddle of spilled coffee, scrubbing the floor of a roadside diner. Nia's eyes locked onto mine. For a split second, there was shock. And then, a look of pure, unadulterated terror washed over her face. It wasn't the look of a thief caught by her rich mother-in-law. It was the look of a hunted animal staring at the barrel of a gun. She scrambled backward, her hands slipping in the grease. "No, no, please," she gasped. She didn't even grab her coat. She just turned and bolted for the heavy metal kitchen door, her heavy belly making her gait uneven and frantic. "Nia, wait!" I called out, my maternal instincts overriding the heavy fog in my brain. I pushed past a complaining customer and shoved the kitchen door open. The heavy Georgia heat hit me like a wet blanket as I stepped into the back alley. The smell of rotting garbage and damp brick filled the air. I found her backed into a corner next to a rusted dumpster. She had nowhere left to run. She was clutching her swollen belly protectively, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. "Miss Maria, please," Nia sobbed, her voice a ragged, broken sound that shattered my heart. "I'll leave the state. I swear to God I'll leave tonight. Just don't tell him. Don't tell Trey I'm here. He'll take my baby. He promised he would take my baby." I froze, my cane digging into the cracked asphalt. "Take your baby? Nia, what are you talking about? Trey said you stole from him. He said you left with another man." Nia let out a wet, bitter laugh that sounded like choking. She slid down the brick wall, collapsing onto the dirty ground. She didn't care about the grime. She was utterly broken. "Stole from him?" she cried out, her voice vibrating with a desperate truth. "I was working freelance bookkeeping to pay our mortgage because Trey was draining his accounts to buy jewelry for Jasmine. He didn't just cheat on me, Ms. Maria. He brought her into our home. He told me I was crazy. He told the doctors I was unstable." She looked up at me, her brown eyes pleading, wide with a trauma so deep it made my own blood run cold. "When I found out I was pregnant," Nia whispered, her whole body shaking, "I thought it would change him, but he just smiled. He and Jasmine, they cornered me in the kitchen. Trey told me that the moment this baby was born, he was going to have me committed to a psychiatric ward. He said he needed the heir to secure his place in your company, but he didn't need the mother." The alley spun around me. The pieces of the puzzle that hadn't fit for the last 8 months suddenly locked together with a sickening crunch. The missing money. The sudden hiring of Jasmine as a strategic consultant at the firm. Trey's insistence on managing my schedule, my doctors, my diet. "He told me to run," Nia sobbed, wrapping her arms around her stomach. "He said if I ever reached out to you, he would make sure I disappeared for good. I didn't take a dime, Ms. Maria. I've been sleeping in my car for 3 months until I saved enough for a motel." I stood there, looking at the mother of my future grandchild, huddled like trash in an alleyway. The fog in my brain, the lethargy, the weakness, evaporated, burned away by a sudden, lethal inferno of clarity. I thought about the bitter tea Trey handed me every single morning. "Jasmine got this special detox blend to help with your circulation." They weren't just waiting for me to step down. They were putting me in the ground. I didn't reach for my phone to call the police. The police couldn't fix a rot this deep. I stepped forward, ignoring the pain in my joints, and knelt in the grime right next to Nia. I reached out and took her trembling, cold hands in my warm ones. "Listen to me, child," I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing the weariness of a sick woman and finding the steel of the matriarch who built an empire from dust. "You are not running anymore, and you are not sleeping in a car." Nia sniffled, looking at me with fearful hesitation. "But Trey, he's too powerful. He has your money." I pulled a handkerchief from my purse and gently wiped the dirt and tears from her cheek. "Trey has my money because I let him hold the purse," I whispered, looking her dead in the eye. "He thinks I am a dying old woman. He thinks he is the king of the castle." I helped her to her feet, feeling the solid fighting kick of my grandchild against my arm as I supported her weight. A fierce, protective smile touched my lips, a smile that promised absolute ruin for the man who thought he could destroy my bloodline. "Let him keep thinking he's the king, Nia," I said softly into the sweltering alley air, "because he forgot one thing. I'm the one who built the castle, and I know exactly where to plant the dynamite." The hardest lie a mother ever has to tell is the one she tells herself about her own child. For 35 years, I looked at Trey and saw my legacy. But as Elias drove us away from that dingy diner under the cover of a sudden Georgia thunderstorm, I looked at the rearview mirror and realized I had raised a stranger. Nia sat beside me in the back seat, wrapped in my heavy cashmere shawl. She was exhausted, shivering not from the cold, but from the sheer adrenaline of finally being found. I didn't take her to a 5-star hotel. Trey managed the corporate accounts. A charge like that would send up a flare. Instead, Elias took us to a modest red-brick duplex in Decatur, a property owned by his sister, far off the Soul and Foundation grid. "You're safe here, baby," I whispered, helping her onto a faded floral sofa that smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. "Elias will be right outside. I'll send a private nurse in the morning." Nia gripped my hand, her knuckles white. "Miss Maria, if he finds out I talked to you—" "He won't," I said, my voice as hard and smooth as polished marble, "because when I see him tomorrow, I am going to be exactly what he expects to see, a dying, oblivious old woman." I waited until Nia finally closed her eyes, her breathing evening out into the exhausted sleep of an expectant mother who had been running for too long. Then I stepped back out into the rain. The storm was washing the streets clean, and God is my witness, I was about to do the same to my empire. The next morning, the sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Buckhead estate. It was a beautiful, mocking kind of morning. I was sitting in my favorite velvet armchair in the study, a thick quilt draped over my knees. I practiced making my hands tremble. I let my shoulders slump. Right on schedule, at 7:30 a.m., the heavy oak doors swung open. Trey walked in, looking like he belonged on the cover of Forbes. Behind him trailed Jasmine. She was wearing a tailored designer suit that I knew my company had paid for. Her lips were painted a sharp, predatory red. "Good morning, Mama," Trey said, his voice dripping with that unbearable, sugary concern. He set the silver tray on the side table. There it was, the porcelain cup, the steam rising from the dark, earthy liquid. "We brought your detox tea," Jasmine purred, stepping forward to adjust the quilt over my knees. The smell of her heavy, expensive perfume made me want to gag. "You look so pale today, Maria. Are you sure you shouldn't just stay in bed?" "They want me horizontal," I thought. "Easier to bury a woman who's already lying down." "Just tired, child," I rasped, leaning my head back against the chair. I reached out with a violently shaking hand, intentionally missing the saucer on the first try. Trey's eyes flickered with something dark and satisfied before he guided my hand to the cup. "Drink up, Mama, for your circulation," he murmured. I brought the cup to my lips, letting the bitter steam hit my face. But I didn't swallow. I let the liquid wet my lips, pretending to take a slow, agonizing sip. "Thank you," I whispered, closing my eyes. I think I just need to close my eyes for a moment. Leave the tray. I'll finish it." Trey and Jasmine exchanged a look, a secret, silent high five between two vipers. "Of course, Mama. Rest well," Trey said. The moment the heavy doors clicked shut, the act was over. My eyes snapped open. The tremor in my hand vanished. I moved with a speed that would have terrified my son. I pulled a small, sterilized glass travel flask from the deep pocket of my robe and poured every single drop of that detox tea into it. I sealed it tight, shoving it deep into my purse. 2 hours later, Elias parked the town car behind a private, high-end medical diagnostic lab in Midtown. I didn't go to my regular physician. Trey had access to those records. I went to Dr. Eris Thorne. 30 years ago, my foundation had paid for Eris's medical school tuition when his family lost everything. Loyalty like that doesn't expire. I sat in his secure office, watching the second hand on the wall clock tick. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, Eris walked in. He was a tall, distinguished man in his 50s, but right now his face was the color of ash. He locked the door behind him and sat down, placing a manila folder on the desk. "Maria," Eris started, his voice thick with a sorrow that made my stomach drop. "I ran it through the mass spectrometer twice, just to be absolutely sure." "Say it, Eris," I commanded, keeping my spine perfectly straight. "Don't sugarcoat it." He swallowed hard. "It's arsenic, a very specific, highly refined industrial grade. It's odorless, and the tea masks the bitter taste. It's a low dose, Maria. Calculated. Whoever is doing this knows exactly how to keep you hovering on the edge of death, mimicking natural organ failure, without crossing the line too soon. Arsenic. My own flesh and blood. The boy I had taught to walk was methodically measuring out poison into my morning cup, watching me drink it while asking if I was comfortable. They call it the inheritance powder in toxicology circles, Eris whispered. Maria, if you've been drinking this for 6 months, we need to start you on chelation therapy immediately. I have to report this to the police. No, I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. No police, not yet. Eris looked at me like I had lost my mind. He is trying to murder you. And if you call the police now, he'll hire the best lawyers in Georgia, claim the tea was a bad herbal batch, and drag my company through the mud. I leaned forward, the matriarch waking up in full force. I need the antidote, Eris. Give me the pills in unmarked vitamin bottles. I will take them in secret. Let Trey think the poison is working. Maria, that is incredibly dangerous. I built my life doing dangerous things, doctor, I said, standing up. The nausea was still there, but it was nothing compared to the cold, calculating fury settling into my bones. He's not waiting for me to pass the torch, Eris. He's setting the house on fire, and I need to know exactly why. That night, while the house was dead quiet, I locked myself in my private home office. If Trey was arrogant enough to poison me, he was arrogant enough to leave a paper trail. I bypassed the standard corporate servers and logged into the Master Equity portal using a backdoor administrative key I had never told Trey about. I started digging. I didn't look at the main accounts. I looked at the shadows. It took me 3 hours to find the rot. Trey wasn't just draining his own trust fund. He had set up a dummy corporation under Jasmine's maiden name. He had been funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars from our community housing projects into offshore accounts. But that wasn't the twist that made me stop breathing. My cursor hovered over a hidden PDF file titled Executive Reassurance Addendum. I clicked it. It was my life insurance policy. But the numbers had been altered. Someone had used my digital signature, likely lifted from my tablet while I was passed out from the poison, to increase the payout. If I died of natural causes tomorrow, Trey Washington wouldn't just inherit the company. He would receive a direct, tax-free cash payout of $15 million. He didn't just want the empire, he was cashing me out. I sat back in my heavy leather chair, staring at the screen until my eyes burned. The pain in my heart was a physical, jagged thing, but I didn't cry. Tears are for the helpless, and I was far from it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, unmarked bottle Eris had given me. I shook out 2 heavy white pills, the antidote to my son's betrayal. I swallowed them dry. $15 million, I thought, looking out the window at the Atlanta skyline I had helped shape. Trey thought he was playing checkers, moving pieces off the board to claim his prize. But he was about to learn that his mother had been a grandmaster at chess before he was even born. And I was about to take all his pieces. There is a specific kind of silence in a house that thinks it is waiting for a funeral. For 48 hours, I played the ghost in my own mansion. I let Trey and Jasmine watch me stumble, let them pour that poisoned tea down my sink while pretending it went down my throat. I swallowed my antidote in the dark. I was healing, cell by cell, while they measured the drapes for my wake. But the silence shattered at 11:42 p.m. on a Thursday. It wasn't my sleek corporate smartphone. It was the $20 prepaid burner I had bought with cash and given to Elias. I snatched it up before the second buzz. Speak. Ms. Maria. Elias's voice was a low, urgent gravel over the line. The sound of heavy rain lashed in the background. 2 black SUVs just pulled onto the street near the Decatur duplex. Tinted windows, Fulton County plates. They're circling the block. Trey's men found the safe house. My blood turned to ice, but my mind snapped into absolute lethal focus. Are they inside? Not yet. They're watching the exits, waiting for the signal probably. I'm coming down, I ordered, throwing off the heavy quilts that were supposed to be my deathbed. Pull the car to the service entrance. Keep your headlights off. I didn't grab a designer coat or my diamond watch. I grabbed a dark, heavy raincoat and my cane, not because I needed it to walk anymore, but because a solid piece of hickory is a good thing to have in your hand when the devil comes knocking. Elias drove like a man possessed. He was 65, with silver at his temples, but the man had driven for me when we were dodging debt collectors 30 years ago. He knew how to move through the shadows of this city. We cut through the back alleys of Decatur, the heavy Georgia thunderstorm hiding our approach. When we parked 2 streets over from the duplex, I saw them, 2 black SUVs idling under a broken street lamp. Elias, the back gate, I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. We slipped through the muddy rear alley, the rain soaking through my coat. We reached the back door of the duplex and slipped my spare key into the lock. The moment the door opened, a sound tore through the dark living room that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a sharp, jagged cry of pure agony. "Nee!" I rushed inside, Elias right behind me, locking the deadbolt. I found her collapsed on the linoleum kitchen floor, clutching her swollen belly, her face slick with cold sweat. The sheer terror of seeing those black SUVs outside had triggered a catastrophic physical response. "Ms. Maria?" Nia gasped, her fingernails digging into the kitchen cabinets. My water just broke. It's too early. Oh God, it's a month too early." "Open up. Building maintenance." A rough, muffled voice shouted from the front porch. Maintenance at midnight. Trey wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. "Elias, help me get her up," I commanded, the adrenaline erasing every trace of the arsenic's ghost in my veins. We hoisted Nia between us, her face contorting in another massive contraction. She bit down on her lip to keep from screaming as the men at the front door began to ram their shoulders against the wood. The frame splintered with a sickening crack. We hauled her out the back door and into the muddy alley just as the front door gave way. We could hear heavy boots stomping through the living room behind us. "Move, baby, move," I urged Nia, shielding her body with my own as we dragged her toward the idling town car. Elias threw open the back door, and we shoved Nia inside. I dove in right behind her as Elias sprinted to the driver's seat. The men burst out the back door of the duplex, spotting our taillights. One of them reached into his jacket. "Hit it, Elias!" I roared. Nia screamed, a raw, primal sound as she rode out another contraction in the back seat. She gripped my hand with a strength that nearly broke my fingers. "Emory Hospital, Ms. Maria?" Elias shouted over the engine in the rain, checking his rearview mirror. "No!" I snapped. "Trey sits on the charitable board at Emory. He has alerts on Grady Memorial, too. If we register her at any major hospital in Fulton County, his lawyers will be waiting in the delivery room with a court order to take the child." "Where then, Mama?" Nia sobbed, tears and sweat mingling on her face. "He's coming. The baby is coming right now." I pulled out my burner phone, my thumbs flying across the keypad. When you build a community, you don't just build brick and mortar. You build debts. You build loyalty. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. "Dr. Sarah speaking." The voice was groggy but professional. "Sarah, it's Maria Washington." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. 20 years ago, Sarah was a brilliant girl from the South Side who couldn't afford college. My foundation paid for her undergrad, her medical school, and her residency. "Ms. Maria, it's midnight. Is everything okay?" "I am 5 minutes away from your county clinic," I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. "I have a woman in premature labor. I need the back doors open. I need an incubator ready. And I need her registered under a Jane Doe. No records in the central system. Can you do that for me, Sarah? Pull into the ambulance bay. The doors will be open." The fluorescent lights of the clinic were blinding after the dark, rainy streets. Dr. Sarah and a discreet team of nurses whisked Nia onto a gurney the second Elias slammed the brakes in the bay. I walked beside the gurney, refusing to let go of Nia's hand. My expensive raincoat left a trail of rainwater on the sterile linoleum. "You stay with me, Nia," I said, my voice a deep, steady anchor in the sterile chaos. "You push the fear out, and you push this baby into the world. I promise you, on my life and the life of my ancestors, Trey Washington will never touch this child." Nia looked at me, her brown eyes wide, terrified, but trusting. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." For the next 2 hours, the delivery room became a battlefield. I stood by her head, wiping her brow, while Dr. Sarah commanded the room with brilliant precision. The tension was suffocating. The baby was early, and Nia's body was exhausted from months of living in fear and sleeping in a car. I watched this young woman, the one my son had called weak, crazy, and a thief, fight with the strength of a lioness. She wasn't just birthing a child. She was fighting for her right to be a mother. "One more push, Nia. The head is crowning," Dr. Sarah commanded. Nia let out a final, earth-shattering cry, squeezing my hand so hard my rings cut into my skin. And then, silence. A terrifying, breathless split second of silence, followed by the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my 62 years on this earth. "It's a boy," Dr. Sarah said, her voice thick with a smile beneath her surgical mask. "He's small, but his lungs are perfect. Nia collapsed back against the pillows, weeping uncontrollably as the nurses quickly cleaned the tiny thrashing infant. They wrapped him in a soft striped receiving blanket and placed him gently on Nia's chest. I looked down at the tiny wrinkled face of my grandson. He had a mop of dark curls and hands that were already balled up into little fists, ready to fight. "Zion," Nia whispered, kissing the top of his head. "His name is Zion." "Welcome to the world, Zion," I murmured, reaching out to gently touch his tiny warm cheek. In that moment, the empire, the money, the real estate, none of it mattered. This heartbeat was the only foundation worth protecting. But peace, I was learning, is a very fragile glass. Just as the nurses moved to transfer Zion to an observation incubator, Elias stepped into the delivery room. His face was grave, the deep lines around his mouth carved in shadow. He didn't say a word. He just handed me my burner phone. I looked at the glowing screen. It was a text message, sent to Elias's number from an unknown contact. It wasn't a threat. It was a photograph. It was a picture of Elias's town car, parked right outside the clinic's ambulance bay, taken from across the street. Underneath the photo was a single line of text. "You can't hide the air, Mama." They had followed us. The monster was at the gates. There is a moment in every war where the smoke clears, and you finally see the shape of the devil you are fighting. For me, that moment wasn't in a boardroom. It was in the sterile glow of a maternity ward hallway, staring at a photograph of my own car on a burner phone. "You can't hide the air, Mama." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the glass. My grandson Zion was less than an hour old, sleeping in a secure incubator 20 feet away. Nia was exhausted, finally resting under the watchful eye of Dr. Sarah. And the men who wanted to tear them apart were sitting in the rain, right outside the building. "Elias," I whispered, my voice dropping to a gravelly command. "Did anyone follow us into the bay?" "No, Ms. Maria," Elias said, his jaw tight. He was already pulling a heavy steel flashlight from his coat. I checked the mirrors. I drove through 3 red lights and 2 blind alleys. Nobody tailed us physically. Then how did they know? Elias didn't answer. He just turned and sprinted back down the hallway toward the service elevator. I turned to Dr. Sarah, who had stepped out of the delivery room, her face pale. "Sarah, lock down this wing," I ordered. "Code Silver. Nobody comes through those double doors without your personal authorization. If anyone tries to force their way in, you call the county sheriff, not the local precinct." "I'm on it, Maria," she nodded, her hands moving quickly over the nurse's station keypad. The heavy magnetic locks on the maternity ward doors engaged with a resounding final thud. 10 minutes later, Elias returned. He wasn't holding his flashlight anymore. He was holding a small black plastic disc, no bigger than a quarter, blinking with a tiny microscopic red light. "Magnetic GPS tracker," Elias said, his voice laced with disgust. It was tucked up inside the rear wheel well of the town car. "Miss Maria, Trey doesn't know the first thing about military-grade surveillance. He pays people to wash his car. He doesn't crawl under it in the mud." I took the tracker from his large, calloused hand. It was cold and precise. Elias was right. My son was greedy, arrogant, and cruel, but he was also deeply, fundamentally lazy. Setting up dummy corporations was one thing. Planting black market tracking hardware was another. If Trey didn't plant this, I murmured, the gears in my mind turning with lethal speed, then who is steering the ship? I needed a ghost. I needed someone who could see through the digital walls of my own company. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. It belonged to Desmond. He was a 24-year-old cybersecurity prodigy who grew up in one of our subsidized housing units. When he hacked into the Atlanta public school system at 16 to change his little sister's attendance record, the city wanted to send him to juvenile detention. I paid for his lawyer, and then I paid for his tuition at Georgia Tech. "Ms. Washington?" Desmond's voice crackled through the line, thick with sleep. It was 3 a.m. "Desmond, I need you on a keyboard right now," I said. "I'm sending you an IP address and a phone number. The number texted Elias's burner tonight. I want to know exactly where it pinged from, and I want you to run a deep web background check on a woman named Jasmine Vance. She's currently claiming to be my son's strategic consultant." "Give me 10 minutes, Mama Washington," he said, the sleep vanishing from his voice instantly. The sound of rapid, furious typing began before he even hung up. I sat on a hard plastic waiting room chair, my cane resting across my knees. When Desmond called back, his voice was tight, scared. "Miss Maria, you need to see this," Desmond said. "I just sent a secure PDF to your phone. First off, the text message to Elias didn't come from Trey's phone. It was sent from a secure server located in downtown Atlanta. Specifically, a server registered to Vanguard Holdings. Vanguard Holdings. The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Vanguard was a ruthless, multi-billion-dollar urban redevelopment conglomerate. For the past 5 years, they had been aggressively trying to buy out Soul and Foundation. They wanted our prime real estate in South Atlanta to bulldoze our community centers and build luxury condos. I had shut the door in their CEO's face 3 times. "Keep going, Desmond," I rasped, opening the PDF on my phone. "Jasmine Vance doesn't exist, Ms. Maria," Desmond continued, his keyboard clacking rapidly. "Her real name is Jasmine DuPont. She isn't a consultant. She's a corporate acquisition mercenary. She has been on Vanguard's payroll for 4 years. She specializes in infiltrating family-owned businesses, finding the weakest link, and fracturing them from the inside so Vanguard can buy the pieces for pennies." I stared at the glowing screen. There was a photo of Jasmine, not in the designer suits Trey bought her, but in a sharp gray blazer, shaking hands with the CEO of Vanguard at a corporate retreat 2 years ago. The weakest link. My son. I closed my eyes, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping my lips. Trey thought he was a king making moves on a chessboard. He thought he had found a beautiful, brilliant woman who finally recognized his genius and helped him overthrow his overbearing mother. He didn't realize he was just a pawn being fattened up for the slaughter. "Desmond," I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm, "if I die of natural causes and Trey inherits the company, what happens next?" "I found a drafted contract in her hidden cloud drive, Ms. Maria," Desmond whispered. "If Trey takes over, Jasmine has him legally cornered. She's been secretly transferring corporate liabilities into his name. The second he becomes CEO, Vanguard will trigger a massive debt call. Trey will face federal fraud charges for the offshore accounts she helped him set up. He'll go to federal prison, and Vanguard will seize Soul and Foundation in the bankruptcy auction." Jasmine wasn't just my executioner. She was Trey's too. She was handing him the arsenic to kill me, only to dig a second grave for him right beside mine. "Thank you, Desmond. Scrub your hard drive," I said, and hung up. I sat in the sterile hallway, the truth wrapping around me like a suit of armor. My son had sold his soul, his wife, and his own mother for a woman who was actively planning to destroy him. It was pathetic. It was tragic. But most of all, it was a mistake they were both about to pay for. I stood up, gripping my hickory cane. I walked over to the reinforced nursery window and looked through the glass. Zion was sleeping peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling. He was the root of this family, and it was time for me to burn out the rot so he could grow. I pulled out my corporate phone, the one Trey tracked, and turned it back on. I drafted a single text message to my son. "Trey, I am ready to step down. Meet me tomorrow at noon at the original soul food restaurant on Auburn Avenue. Bring the transfer papers, and bring Jasmine. It's time to pass the torch." I hit send. Let the devil come to my table. He was about to find out that Maria Washington doesn't just serve tea. She serves justice. When you build a house, the most important part isn't the roof or the windows or the expensive hardwood floors. It's the foundation. If the foundation is cracked, it doesn't matter how much gold you paint on the walls. The house will fall. I spent 40 years building Soul and Foundation. I thought I poured the concrete perfectly. But as I sat at the corner booth of my very first restaurant on Auburn Avenue, wiping the polished wood of the table, I realized the crack in my foundation wasn't in the business. It was in my bloodline. I had closed the restaurant to the public for the afternoon. The chairs were stacked on the tables, and the smell of fried green tomatoes and smoked collards lingered in the air, the scent of my history, the scent of survival. At exactly noon, the bell above the front door chimed. Trey walked in first, wearing a tailored navy suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He looked around the empty diner with a sneer of barely concealed disgust. Jasmine followed close behind, her stiletto heels clicking sharply against the worn linoleum. She carried herself like a queen walking into a conquered province. "Mama," Trey said, pulling out a chair across from me. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He just opened his briefcase. "I brought the transfer documents. The notary is waiting in the car outside. Are you sure you want to do this here? It smells like grease. I looked at my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the teenager I had taught to drive, the man who had been slowly feeding me arsenic for 6 months. This place is where the Washington name actually meant something, Trey, I said, my voice smooth, quiet, and perfectly steady. I didn't tremble. I didn't slump. I sat up straight, folding my hands over the gold handle of my cane. Jasmine leaned forward, placing a manicured hand on the table. Maria, we all know it's time. You're unwell. Trey is ready to step up and modernize the portfolio. Just sign the papers and you can finally go to sleep. Go to sleep. The double meaning hung in the air like a guillotine. I reached into my purse, but I didn't pull out a pen. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope and dropped it onto the table with a loud, satisfying smack. Before I sign over my empire, I said, looking directly into Jasmine's eyes, I want to talk about Vanguard Holdings. Jasmine's perfect predatory smile froze. It didn't drop completely, but the corners of her mouth tightened. Trey looked confused, glancing between the envelope and me. Vanguard? Trey asked, scoffing. Mama, Vanguard has been trying to buy us out for years. What does that have to do with the transfer? Everything, my sweet, foolish boy, I murmured. I slid the first photograph out of the envelope and pushed it across the table. It was the picture Desmond had found, Jasmine shaking hands with the CEO of Vanguard. Trey stared at the photo. He blinked, once, twice. Jasmine? When was this? I didn't let her answer. I unleashed the avalanche. Her name isn't Jasmine Vance, I said, my voice rising in volume, filling the empty restaurant. Her name is Jasmine DuPont. She is a corporate mercenary on Vanguard's payroll. Her job was to find the weakest, most arrogant, most easily manipulated member of a family-owned business and use him to tear the company apart from the inside. Trey's face drained of color. He looked at Jasmine, waiting for her to laugh, to call me crazy, to deny it. But Jasmine was silent. Her eyes were darting toward the exits, calculating the distance to the front door. She didn't love you, Trey, I continued, twisting the knife of truth. She used you to set up offshore accounts. She used you to embezzle community funds. And the moment you signed those transfer papers today, she was going to trigger a massive debt call on the hidden liabilities she secretly put in your name. You wouldn't be the CEO of Solon Foundation, Trey. You would be a federal inmate, and Vanguard would buy my life's work in a bankruptcy auction. No, that's not true, Trey stammered, his hands shaking as he read the undeniable proof. He turned to Jasmine, his voice cracking with a pathetic, desperate rage. Tell her she's lying, Jasmine. Tell her. Jasmine didn't look at him. She looked at me. The mask of the sweet, supportive girlfriend vanished, replaced by the cold, dead eyes of a corporate shark. You're smarter than you look, old woman, Jasmine sneered, dropping the act completely. She stood up, grabbing her designer purse. But it doesn't matter. The embezzlement is in his name. The forged life insurance is in his name. I'm walking out of here, and he's going to take the fall for all of it. Good luck explaining this to your shareholders, Maria. She turned to walk toward the door. I don't have to explain it to my shareholders, Jasmine, I said, my voice echoing like thunder. Because they are already here. Jasmine stopped dead in her tracks. From the kitchen, my board of directors stepped out. From the back office emerged the elders of my community, the pastors, the local councilmen, the people who had built this city with me. And stepping right through the front door, blocking Jasmine's exit, were 3 plainclothes FBI agents and 2 Fulton County sheriffs. The restaurant was suddenly suffocatingly crowded. I had live-streamed the entire conversation to the authorities and my board through a microphone in my lapel. The trap hadn't just closed. It had locked, sealed, and buried them. Trey fell to his knees on the linoleum. The designer suit didn't make him look like a king anymore. He looked like a little boy who had broken a window and was terrified of the belt. Mama, please, Trey sobbed, crawling toward my chair, his hands reaching for my skirt. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was setting me up. You have to protect me, Mama. I'm your son. I looked down at him. The arsenic that had coursed through my veins for 6 months pulsed in my memory. I thought of Nia, sleeping in a car, terrified for her life. I thought of baby Zion, forced into the world a month early because of the terror this man had caused. I pulled my skirt out of his grasp and stood up, leaning my weight on my cane. You poured poison into my tea, Trey. I said, my voice a quiet, devastating whisper that carried across the silent room. You drove your pregnant wife into the streets. You sold your soul to play the big man, and you expected me to die quietly so you could wear my crown. I'm sorry, he screamed, tears streaming down his face as 2 federal agents hauled him to his feet. Blood makes you related, I said, looking him dead in the eye for the last time. But loyalty makes you family. And you, Trey? You are not my family. I turned my back on him. I didn't watch as they read Jasmine her rights. I didn't listen to Trey's screams as they dragged him out the front door and pushed him into the back of a federal cruiser. I just walked toward the kitchen, toward Elias, who was waiting for me with a quiet, proud smile. The rot was gone. The house was clean. 6 months later, the Georgia sun was shining down on my Buckhead estate. I wasn't sitting in a velvet armchair under a heavy quilt anymore. I was sitting on the patio, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin. The arsenic was completely flushed from my system. My hands were steady. My mind was sharp. He's got your stubbornness, Ms. Maria, a bright voice called out. I looked up to see Nia walking across the lawn. She was wearing a sharp, elegant pantsuit. Last week, the board of directors unanimously voted to appoint her as the new chief financial officer of Soul and Foundation. She had the brilliant, honest mind of an accountant and the fierce, unyielding heart of a mother. She was everything I could have ever wanted in a successor, and in her arms was Zion. He was 6 months old now, perfectly healthy, with big, curious brown eyes, and a smile that could light up the entire city of Atlanta. Nia placed him in my lap. I wrapped my arms around his warm, solid little body. He reached out with a tiny hand and grabbed the gold handle of my cane, letting out a loud, happy squeal. You hold on tight to that, little man, I whispered, kissing his forehead. Everything the light touches. We built it for you. I looked out at the rolling green lawn, my heart finally at peace. Trey was serving a 15-year federal sentence for corporate fraud and attempted murder. Jasmine was facing 20. Vanguard Holdings was under a massive federal investigation that had paralyzed their operations. They thought they could tear down my house. They thought a mother's love was a weakness they could exploit. But they forgot that the same hands that can bake bread and dry tears are the same hands that can lay bricks and build fortresses. My name is Maria Washington. I am a mother, a grandmother, and a survivor. And my foundation? It has never been stronger. Thank you for walking with me through this story of betrayal and survival. As women, we pour so much of ourselves into our families, but we must never forget to protect our own peace and demand the respect we've earned. If Maria's journey resonated with you, if you believe in the power of a mother's intuition and the strength of true family, please leave a comment below. What would you have done if you found out the tea was poisoned? Subscribe to the channel for more stories of powerful women claiming their justice. Until next time, stay strong and protect your foundation.